Kill my jams. How's everybody doing this morning? Somebody want to get this crowd some coffee? How was the keynote?
Great.
Nice. Not as good as you. That is the right answer. All right. So we're going to be talking about an accessibility testing tool today called Pa11y. This title is a little different that you might have seen on the website because I thought of this hilarious idea to retheme this talk and then forgot to have them updated. So anyway, this is going to be how to become an accessibility BFF using your new friend Pa11y. I want to say thank you to all our sponsors. Obviously, this is an amazing conference, and the only way it's possible and to keep ticket prices reasonable is from all the sponsors that help contribute. The staff is amazing. Anybody you see in a pink information shirt, give them a high five. Tell them how grateful you are for running a fantastic event. We're just really lucky to all be here. A little bit about myself. My name is Jennifer Wadella. You can follow me at Pa11y. It's Fetty. The only warning I give is that I do watch and live tweet a trashy reality TV show called The Bachelor, and it is season right now, so follow your own risk. But I am a remote software engineer doing JavaScript consulting at a company called Pa11y, run a nonprofit, and I'm a crazy plant lady because I get to work from home and water all my plants, and I'm praying that when I get back from London, my husband will have not killed them all. So I'm from Kansas City, so if that's in the middle of the United States, if you don't know where that is, but all you really need to know is our most valuable export, Paul Rudd. So why should we care about accessibility? Because we already have friends, right? We don't need more. Okay, I should probably give context because there's maybe two people in the audience who know. This is from a show called Gossip Girl, and Blair and Serena are BFFs, and we're going to be using a tool called Pa11y. It's your pal, and so that's the joke and the tie-in here today. But why do we care about accessibility? This is based on data from Americans, but if you're looking at the whole population, a significant portion of them are visually impaired. And so when we're building applications, we're building websites, we're building applications for users, we need to be aware of the context and the kind of people who maybe don't perceive websites the same way that we do. We also have a significant portion of hearing impaired Americans, as well as physical impairments. And so all these things are restrictions that people can have when they are starting to use their websites. And so that's why we need to be considerate about accessibility. If we start to stack all these different populations together, that's not an insignificant portion of potential users of our websites. And so that's a huge crowd that we might be alienating if we're not producing products that are accessible that they can use. Sorry, was anybody still taking a photo of that? Okay. So does anybody know what accessibility is? In a general concept, you've heard of it. Your boss is nagging you, you need to make a more accessible website, and that's why you're here? Okay, check. So it's a measure of our computer's accessibility to all people, including those with disabilities and impairments. And this is something that really touches everything we do. This is not just, something that you punt to the front-end team to deal with last minute. Understanding accessibility and how it plays into designing your products needs to be considered at every stage of product development. So let's kind of talk about some issues to be aware of. Obviously, we talked at a very high level about visual impairments, hearing impairments, physical impairments. But when we talk about visual, yes, this could mean blindness, but also color blindness affects a significant portion of the population. So as you're designing color schemes and charts and everything like that, if you're dealing with different kinds of color blindness, they may not be able to detect the different changes that you're trying to reflect based on your color scheme. You can actually use this cool website that's a contrast checker, because a lot of times if people have visual impairments, they're going to have a hard time determining a foreground from a background. And so this is actually a contrast checker that you can go through and use to evaluate your websites. And we're going to, the main focus of this talk is to talk about the tool Pa11y because it integrates really well into modern app development and integrating into your build process. But I'm going to touch on a couple other accessibility resources that you can use, especially if you're trying to argue for the case of accessibility at your job. These are some kind of things you can like tuck in your tool belt, right, to whip out and be like, well, we don't have enough contrast on this, so we need to make the font darker. When we talk about auditory impairments, this is going to definitely mean deafness or partial deafness. So if you have content on your site that you're expecting people to hear, things like that, that's something to consider. This also means that people are going to need to rely on subtitles and text. So you're starting to see more videos come out that have transcripts done, things like that. These are all considerations to make for those who aren't going to be able to rely on their hearing to interact with your website. And I feel like motor impairments is something we don't think about a lot. You've got people who are obviously dealing with some really significant things with loss of limbs. But another thing to think about are people with, who are aging and they're gonna have more trouble with dexterity and using a mouse or maybe touching an iPad, that kind of thing. There are also diseases that affect people's motor control. They might have shakes or something like that to be aware of. Or just general struggles using a mouse or a keyboard. Has anybody had a small child ever? Okay, so you're like automatically impaired, right? Like you've got a child in one arm and you're trying to do everything with this hand. And so it's just interesting to think about people not having both hands on a keyboard and a mouse at all the time. So just issues to be aware of. If you really want to try it out, you can like do the thing where you tie your arm behind your back and then try and use a website and see how that goes. A couple other considerations to think about are mobile devices, if people are going to struggle to interact with those, making sure that areas are big enough and clickable enough and they can read, or if they have settings enhanced on their phone where they've got font sizes scaled up, that your applications are going to play well with that. Slow internet connectivity actually plays into accessibility, because if somebody lacks internet access, they're not going to be able to use your site and use your tools as well. Again, mentioned talking about enlarged or zoomed in text. I don't know if you know this, but like on phones, you can actually go through in the settings and the text will be like one word per line, like my mother has it, sorry mom. But these are things to be aware of. So when we start to think about how we're going to go ahead and build accessible websites, we've got kind of this accessibility checklist. And some of these you may not heard of before, and we'll kind of talk through the documentation around them, but we've got things like landmark roles that a screen reader is going to use to figure out what's going on in the page, whether it's a main content area, whether it's navigation, that kind of thing. Language attributes are really, really important if you've ever paid attention to like the head of a page. Actually, let me get a feel for the room real quick. How many front-end devs do I have in the room? People who deal with markup. Yeah, raise your hands proud and come to PubConf tonight. I'm shitting on .NET developers. All right, how many back-end devs do I have in the room? Okay, so fairly even mix. I'm trying not to like use all my jokes that I'm going to use tonight when I'm making fun of like not understanding semantic markup. But understanding how to use a language attribute, making sure that a user can get translated text if they need it, using semantic headings. That means, you know, having your H1 and your H2 and your P tags in places that make sense for a screen reader as it goes down the page and is trying to understand the hierarchy of the content you're trying to provide. I know we've gotten really fancy with the way we handle doing links with all our front-end frameworks, but making sure that they're focus states and they're recognizable, that your link actually looks like a link and something that should be clicked on. Image alt text are huge. Just making sure that if somebody is visually impaired and they're using a screen reader, there's going to be some sort of documentation of what an image on a page is, especially if it's lending really good context to whatever you're discussing. Making sure forms are navigatable, audio and video, providing transcripts when possible, looking at color and contrast, and also doing screen reading and keyboard testing. And so there are different tools that you can use with screen readers to read through the content of your page to make sure that it seems logical, as well as keyboard testing, tabbing, making sure you can navigate without relying on a mouse. So when we talk about this tool called Pa11y, it is going to catch errors for us. But in order to understand its efficacy, we need to understand what those errors are that it's looking for to kind of make sense of the output it's going to contribute. So a lot of this, we'll talk through some of the different guidelines, and there are all sorts of different settings depending on what level of accessibility you need to consider. So we can kind of talk through some of these guidelines, but the basic one that a lot of people rely on is done by the World Wide Web Consortium. US finally picked it up, I believe January 17th of last year. Everything had to be accessible according to this. So this is a really good place to start for your understanding. It's been around for a surprisingly long time, which is like, why are we just now talking about accessibility? Why does everybody just care now? Apparently we're lacking in empathy in this area. But these standards have been in place for quite some time, so it's definitely good to be aware of them and understand what we're trying to solve. Okay, so they kind of have this broken down into logical chunks. The first chunk is called perceivable. We want to make sure that we have text alternatives for non-text content, so that way people using screen readers are fine. If we have time-based media, we want to make sure we're providing alternatives. So if you're using like pop-ups or things that are happening on a timeline on a page, making sure that if somebody doesn't have the visual cue to see when that's happening, that it is covered for. Creating content that can be presented in different ways. meaning like if we've got 1 million navs or things like that, a page that's more straight up and down. And making sure it's easy for users to see and hear content, and again, separating the foreground from the background. Operable is the next concept where we want to make sure that we can actually use the website. We need all our functionality to be available through a keyboard, and I'm sure you've had that thing where you're filling out a form and you're used to tabbing, and then it goes somewhere weird and you're like, oh, now I have to use my mouse. Things like that are important to be aware of. Making sure that users have enough time to read. I feel like we have gotten away from this kind of design system, but there used to be a lot more of flash and whiz-bang and scrollers on the internet. So making sure that users have enough time to read what's going on before that content changes on them. Do not design content in a way that is known to cause seizures. I don't know if you heard about that one Pokemon game that was rumored to be causing seizures for some people, but it is something to be aware of. We have a kids coding club back home in Kansas City, and they will like do some ridiculous stuff in Scratch, which is a drag and drop UI presentation, and like they joke that they're trying to cause seizures for the audience, and they're just lights and colors and everything like that. So it is something good to be aware of. And make sure users can navigate, find content, and have a general understanding of where they are. I have designed a demo website that we will run some tests against that basically breaks all these rules, so we can kind of talk about it a little bit more in context there. But we want to make sure our content is understandable, that it's readable, and this is more where the semantic markups come into play again. If we have a heading, we want to make sure that the corresponding text underneath isn't an appropriate tag. Like you don't want to be mixing up headings, or you're too lazy to figure out CSS styling and putting a different heading in a different area, not realizing that having those headings out of order is actually a really hard problem for accessibility. You want to make your web pages appear and operate in predictable ways, meaning if you have a form, you want to make sure that those are handled in the typical way. Don't be putting your navigation in weird spots, no matter how cool it is. And just be aware that your users might make mistakes and have ways for them to fix them. Like if they filled out something wrong or got to an incorrect area of the website, make sure that they can get back. And finally, robust. We want to maximize compatibility to make sure that as technology progresses, as screen readers progress, that our technology is always working with those assistive technologies and just kind of being aware of the wide sphere of accessibility and how to make that happen. Okay. So we've got all these different levels of standards, and what does that really mean? Level A is just the most basic web accessibility features. So this is like if you're kind of going for the low-hanging fruit and trying to push this forward at your company, like start here, and then you can kind of bump up to higher accessibility levels. 2A is going to deal with the biggest issues and the most common issues, so this is a really good place to shoot for. And then the highest level is the most complex level of web accessibility that's going to be more nuanced, but it is a good place to hit. So those are kind of just the different levels. So as you see the levels of error settings and accessibility tools, that's what this is talking about. Okay, so Section 508 is what we have just enforced in the US that has to do with everything accessibility-wise, but content on the web and applications that we make falls underneath that. So much text. Okay, so they just have like, and this text is awful looking on this slide on purpose, because this is what it is like reading on the website. Like, it's miserable. Like, you sit down to read this and you're just like, oh my God, how am I supposed to pull this off? So much text. So much text. These are just all the changes which were implemented in 2017. And it's not fun to read. Like, who wants to deal with that? Like, I can't sit there and read that website every time I'm building a site. I've got a million other things to think about. Okay, so that's where Pa11y comes into play. This is going to solve a vast majority of our problems when it comes to accessibility testing and integrating that into a build process and making it so we're not like sitting here and trying to sort through what the hell all this means every time we're adding features to our website. Okay, so here's the link on GitHub, and I will tweet the slides out, and there's a slide you can take a photo of with the link, so you don't have to worry about any of this. But this is the GitHub repo. So it's an automated accessibility testing tool. It's going to run a code sniffer against whatever you feed it to test against your pages, and then it's going to spit out error reports for you, so making it very clear of what's going on. So let's test some websites, yeah. I want to talk about a couple different tools, and I'm gonna throw PubConf under the bus. Does anybody not have their PubConf ticket yet? Does anybody not want to admit they're not going to PubConf? You're missing out, sir. Okay. Yes, we have discount codes, so hit me up after if you need one. Okay, so let's look at some basic accessibility tools that we can use to test. Yes, I can't do that in incognito mode. Has anybody heard of Axe for testing? Okay. So this is just, I'm doing this in Chrome, so this is an extension you can install. And I'm just going to show you kind of other tools in the industry. And these are really good for when you just need to pop into a page and figure out what's going on accessibility-wise. And then we'll get into Pa11y, which you can integrate in your developer, in your build process, which can be really helpful. Okay, so we've got this nice little Axe tab here, and we can go ahead and hit analyze. Can you all see that okay? Yeah, it's not great. And this is going to run against whatever URL of a web page you have going on right now. And so this is going to go ahead and, hey, look, it's me, spot some different areas going on. So it looks like we found 39 different issues, and it's going to kind of tell you what's going on, which is really, really nice. So this first issue says, ARIA roles must contain particular children. So this navigation has not been implemented properly according to accessibility. So we can go in and see what's going on. I talked a lot about contrast color. This is telling us that let's see here, the buy tickets button does not have enough contrast. I'm thinking between the orange and the white that we see there. And so this is where a contrast checker can be really, really helpful, because then you can, oh, here we go. Can you all see that? Is that really tiny? Can I? Oh, I can. Okay. I've never actually tried that before. So yeah, this is calling out exactly what it is. And so we can go to a contrast checker website and actually plug colors in and play with sliders until we get the appropriate contrast ratio that we want. So as you're going through and figuring out how to solve these problems, there are all sorts of tools that are really helpful. We don't have a title attribute on this frame, naughty, naughty. HTML element, okay, we don't have a valid value for our language. We're English US, which is apparently not valid there. Li elements must be contained in a list. Oops. So anyway, this is going to show you exactly where the markup is on a page and let you go through and figure out what's going on. So this is just basic accessibility. Has anybody heard of Lighthouse before? Okay. I was like joking last night that I totally like get drunk and run Lighthouse tests against different websites, and everybody looked at me and I was like, nobody else does that. But the cool thing about Lighthouse is it's going to do a couple other things. It's going to cover accessibility. It's going to cover web page best practices. It's going to cover SEO. And it's also going to cover progressive web apps. So when we talk about internet connectivity and people having accessibility issues due to how quickly they can load the pages, it'll run against that. And I'm running this in incognito mode just because it's not going to get hung up on anything else that I have going on in Chrome that'll affect the progressive web apps. But this is just another tool that, again, it's going to run against whatever URL you have populated at the time. You can test different things. You can do different benchmark speeds, that kind of thing. And so this is going to give you a couple different scores. So we're at 68% on accessibility, which probably isn't the end of the world. But again, this is going to kind of give you a little bit of what's going on. I don't like this tool as much when it comes to accessibility testing. I like it as like an overall tool to use because I don't think it's as well thought out as Axe. But it covers a lot of bases here. So we can also see what's going on with the progressive web app. Let's see, does not respond to 200 when offline, lacks a short name, doesn't register a service worker. So it's kind of a really cool thing to go through, and if you click down into these, it's going to give you more information to go and figure out how to fix this issue. Okay, so let's take a look at what Pa11y can do. And before I start that, we're going to look through this fantastic demo website that I have built. So in the show Gossip Girl, there's a website called Gossip Girl where blasts and posts about all the characters get sent out. And so we have several cast members that we might see post about. Yeah, we've got Art that was spotted. We've got, oh look, there's Dylan in Jeff and John's Excellent Adventure. Oh, there's my Pegasus unicorn. Oh, there's Jess making new friends at Tekorama. Jimmy's true love. Okay. So anyway, we got some basic content here. We've got some basic navigation. We've got some cast members displayed here. Oh, look, there's John. Okay, so this is the website that we're going to be running tests against. Let's see here, but we can do some other testing first. Okay, so we can use the Pa11y tool, which is just you do like a npm install Pa11y. And then we can kind of just run from the command line. So if we do, if I can type correctly, it'll be a miracle. And we can start to run basic tests against the URL that we feed it. And it's going to output some content to our terminal here. And so it's telling me, OK, elements in insufficient color, language specified is incorrect. So this is all stuff we've already seen before with these other tools, right? Okay, we can actually also do this with a reporter. And so instead of just dumping everything in our terminal, we can output it to somewhere. And we've got a couple of different options. I'm going to output it to an HTML page. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, that's going to run our tests. Sorry, can you see that okay? That's kind of, let me. Is that better? A little bit? Okay. And so it's going to generate something like this. This isn't styled, but at least the content is there. And we'll go into and do, and I'll show you how reporters work so you can put this into something that makes a little bit more sense. But that way you can output it to an HTML file and have all the information you need. You can output it to JSON. You can output it to CSV, tons of different add-ons there. So the point is this is a very flexible tool that you can integrate for whatever your company's build process is and make this work. Or if you're trying to argue the case for accessibility and you want to pull the design team in to be like, oh, look how inaccessible our website is and we need to put some effort behind this, you can use these tools to help you do that. Boop, 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 boop. Couple other things. We can ignore different things. So if you've got an error on a page, like you might have some content that's being served from a third party that you have no control over and you don't want to get accessibility issues on that, you can use the ignore flag. If you're trying to meet a certain standard, you can use the standard flag. And so all this can just be done from the CLI, which is good for kind of exploring and playing around, but it's not really typical in like your day-to-day workflow, right? Okay. So just to kind of recap, we can run an accessibility test against the URL. We can use a reporter to output results to a file. We can choose whatever rule set we want, and we can choose to ignore warnings and notices. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, we can. One of the better approaches to use Pa11y and integrate in your process is to create a file to kind of write all your tests, and then you can just, again, run it from the command line. And one of the cool things about this is you can actually set a flag on it, and you say, okay, if we hit this many accessibility issues, we're going to go ahead and consider that a complete failure and stop our build or integrate it with that. So, you know, if you're trying to stay below a certain standard, you can absolutely set a threshold for that. So this is what it's going to look like. We're just going to create a file called Pa11y. And so in my project, I've got this. And so I've got it set up to run just against a couple different URLs for my site. You can do other things, like if you have an XML-based sitemap, you can use that to run against everything you have. So if you have a lot of dynamic pages and a lot of dynamic content, that's how you can use it. With a lot of our, single-page web apps that we use, a lot of times you're using templated content, so you really only need to make sure that you're hitting like just one of the posts because it's going to serve up, all the same tags versus having to check every single post on the page. But this is how you would go ahead and begin to set that up. And then we can just run this by running Pa11y. And this is setting the threshold. So if you want to do it via your command line like that, you can say how many errors we're going to have before a failure is determined. Wow. So if we go ahead and run that, it's going to run on all the different URLs I posted it, and you can see which pages I'm erroring out on. So I had 6 different errors on the home page, and it looks like all the other ones are fine right now. And again, kind of pushing out all the content we have seen before. Okay, so that's really good if you've got a basic website, but like nobody has a basic website anymore. So one of the more powerful things you can do is you can use the JavaScript interface where you can do a lot of configuration options and actions to be interacting with your page. If you've got modals, if you've got pop-ups, that kind of thing. So as we walk through this API, when we have our results output, this is kind of the structure of what it's going to look like. Come back. Okay. That'll give you the document title, the page URL that you were running the test against, and an array of whatever issues that came up and kind of what was going on there. So when we talk about custom reporters, this is the kind of data you're going to be dealing with to begin to push into your content. We have a couple options. We can use async await because it's promise-based. So we'll wait on our promise and then do something with the errors. You can also use just basic callbacks. But one of the really powerful things here are the actions. And so if there are certain things you need to do before you actually want to start running tests on the page, like if you know you have an image that's going to take a second to load, you can do timeouts. You can wait for elements to exist on a page. You can click on elements. If you're testing a login screen, you can set those actions to go through and log in, kind of like if you've used Puppeteer or something like that before, very similar in concept. So if you're ever struggling with what's going on, actions can help you kind of navigate through there. You can also verify actions. So if you need to make sure that there's actually a button, submit ID on the page, you can do that and test your actions before then to make sure that they're valid. You can hide elements. So like I mentioned, if you have some sort of third-party ad service or something like that, you can go through and hide whatever elements that you don't want the screen reader to pick up on, so you don't have to worry about that. You can ignore certain warnings. So again, if there's something outside of your controller, maybe there's an error that isn't actually applicable to what you're working on, you can ignore those to make sure they're not cluttering up your reports. We've got a couple different kind of logging options that we can set. Info is just going to be your general info. If you only care about error, you can set that. And that can kind of help, again, customize your reports. When we talk about our page, there are a couple of different things we might need to do, like if we need to set certain cookies to test a different scenario, that can work. If you are testing mobile phone sizes, you can use the viewport and set that. So if you're expecting your content to behave in a certain way on a certain viewport size, you can set all those settings that you might need to run against your page. We talked about rules and standards. So again, if you're trying to hit a certain standard, you can pipe that into your options, and then your tests only run according to those standards. Screen capture is probably the most helpful thing. If you're new to using tools that are basically, running in a headless Chrome environment and you're a very visual person and don't know what's going on, or you're getting no errors, or you're not sure what's happening, the best thing you can do is use this screen capture option. And so this is just creating a screen capture in my directory that I've named. But if you ever don't know what's going on and you can't figure out why your tests aren't working, or you're not getting what you're expecting, this is really powerful so you can see exactly what's happening at that point. You can set a timeout or a wait. So again, if you're waiting for certain content to happen, or if you click something and you know it's going to take a second to load, you can use those features. And then I do want to give you this to take a picture of. This is where the demo code is. And so the Gossip Girl website I have, if you want to play around and go see how I've written the tests or things like that, that's where that lives. Okay, waiting on cameras. All right. All right, let's go ahead and look through some of the tests that I have set up to run against this. So we already looked at the Pa11y configuration, but I went ahead and wrote a couple other tests using the JavaScript interface. So I'm just going to test our first action here. I've got all my logging set, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this to their HTML reporter. And so this is a different NPM package, Pa11y reporter HTML, that'll put it to an HTML file. So I can go ahead and run this. And I've got these, for when you're playing around with this later, I've got scripts built for all these. So I've got Pa11y, which will just run against the Pa11y file, I've got Pa11y, which will run our basic example, and then a custom dashboard where I'll walk you through that I created. But okay, so we'll go ahead and run our basic. And so it's showing you it's launching in headless Chrome. It's got the document title page, so we're good to go there. And then this was outputting to a file. I just had it written to write to an output directory in the index.html. So if we open that, if I can remember my directories. Oh, I keep switching names. So this has got some nice styling. This is just their built-in default reporter. And so this can be a really nice, more visual way to understand what's going on. So it's telling us which principle that this issue is affecting. So image element is only content of the link but missing alt text. So I need to go and find alt text for where this image is. So this looks like it is part of my navigation. So alt text should describe the purpose of the link. So if I go in and start to fix my code, okay, we can see that I've got my navigation here. This is, by the way, I talked about how terrible this website is. This has got navigation on the right side. When do we ever see that anymore? So that's a big no-no. So let's look at our nav. And then it looks like I'm taking a bunch of nav items, and this is where I need, what did that say? I need alt text. So I can go ahead and be able to begin to fix that. This image is missing an alt attribute, uh-oh. And so I can go in to fix these errors. I'm gonna go ahead and use this. And then we need alt text here. Okay, and so if we go and run our report again, I don't think that worked. Yeah, no, I am not that good. All right, so something went wrong. So here is how we can begin to troubleshoot. So I'm pretty sure that that did not fix all the errors. So we can go into where I have my basic example, and I can set an option to do screenshot. And we will call that I think I have that right. Never commit to memory that which you can look up in a book, right? All right, so let's double check that that's screen capture. Yep, okay. See, not screenshot. Say what?
Slash for the bottom of PNG.
Yes, good call. Okay, so let's see what's going on because I'm pretty sure there should not be errors there. If I can find my screenshot, where did it go? Did I miss that? Good call. Live debugging, fun times. Yes, that would be why. Okay, sweet, we worked that time. Okay, so now let's see what was going on, because I'm pretty sure I'm not that good. Doesn't look like anything loaded. Oh, did I have an error on my page? That's probably why. Actually, if I tab over here, I probably did something wrong. This is why I like live coding is fun, kids. Bless you. Check our screenshot. All right, now we're back in action again. Okay, so that is kind of how you can start to go through and figure out and fix your errors and debug. So let's look at a more advanced example because this is just running against one URL and that's not very typical. So let's say I have a bunch of URLs that I want to create and run tests against and they all have different actions or things that they need to go on. I can go ahead and I can create an array of different tests I want to run and then I can go through and iterate through all of those. And this is kind of a custom reporter I've built that is going to run tests, create an HTML file for every page that I want to run a test against. And then take screenshots just in case I don't know what's going on, and then build like a huge dashboard to let me know all the issues I have going. So this is, I call it Pa11y Dash or Pa11y Dashboard. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, so what this has done is this has generated a new folder where I've got all these different files and all these different screenshots of what's going on. So we could go ahead and take a look at this. And so it generated this nice report for me so I can go through and I can click into all the different pages, find out exactly what's going on, and see the screenshots that I have to worry about. And so I've got a lot of image elements that are missing and that kind of thing. So that's how I went through and I've built this custom reporter that I can do where I can kind of build and create it to whatever I need it to be. Again, like if you want to help argue the case for getting more accessibility work done, building some sort of dashboard to convince business people that it's necessary, you can absolutely do all this. But this is a lot of work, like seriously, who has time for that? So the cool thing is there are there's a Pa11y dashboard available, so if you don't want to do all your custom scripting, you can go ahead and you can install their dashboard, and it's going to give you a nice output like this that'll give you some errors and notices. I do want to say that one of the cool things that my output does is it links you to whatever that principle or that guideline is, so if I don't understand what's going on based on that, I actually went ahead and built in links based on all the errors to the HTML code sniffer page so I can read and figure out exactly what's going on. So this is really useful if you've got new team members coming on board and they're trying to get on the accessibility train and they don't know what's going on. You can make it really easy for them to figure out exactly what these errors are and go in and solve them. Okay, so kind of a recap. We wrote a very basic test. It was against just our homepage of the website. We looked at kind of the errors and figured out how to go out and fix them. We ran into an issue because I broke the code and then we weren't getting anything happening, and so I took a screenshot to help me figure out what was going on. We outputted our results to an HTML file so we could have kind of a better view of what's going on. We created a custom, well, I created a custom report HTML file, but you can take credit for it. We created a custom dashboard, and we talked about how to use actions to aid tests. Okay, so if we want to start arguing the business side, like why do we need to do this? Why do we need to care? The first thing that Pa11y really gives us is it's minimal effort to implement. Like we can really easily get this up and running. We can go after low-hanging fruit, and we can easily, integrate those threshold failures into our build process. There are a lot of immediate improvements available. Like we're very imperfect human beings, and sometimes as we're writing code, we're more focused on the functionality or solving the harder problems, and so we forget about the really simple and easy ones. So a lot of the times, going in and taking a look at accessibility and getting it going is really not a lot of effort for a huge amount of improvement. This is definitely going to help us retain our audience members. There's no quicker way to alienate a potential user, a potential customer, than having a website that they can't use. It's definitely going to build customer loyalty. If people are using your products and they are somebody who, suffers from accessibility issues, and they're able to use your product, they're going to tell other people in their communities about how great your product is. So it's a really good way to build customer loyalty. It's actually going to help improve your SEO if you're trying to use that to get people's attention. Better accessibility leads to better SEO on your pages. You can avoid lawsuits. And so you think, oh, no, this never happens. An old boss of mine was working for a tech education startup, and the startup failed because they had not made their tool accessible, and they got just sued, and the entire company collapsed. So it does happen. That is a real life story. So I hope you can use all these, and if you want to take a photo of that, that's fine. But to kind of really help convince your team that accessibility does matter, and there are real, tangible, beneficial outcomes for making sure that we are being considerate in our design and our development process and making, yes?
How much would you argue the sort of curtain-cut effect of actually these things are better for everyone, not just people who are impaired?
I am a very pragmatic person in a very imperfect world. So if we were all good human beings that cared about other human beings, we could argue that it's the right thing to do.
Oh, no, arguing that even so, like curtain cuts that were put in for wheelchair users, but are also great for people with bikes and people with pushchairs and everyone who wants to cross the road, and it just makes your website better for everyone.
Yes.
Not just being nice.
That is valid too. Sorry, I need more coffee. Yeah, it's better for everyone. Because, yeah, you might not always have a child in your arm and only have one hand to navigate. But anyway, yes, arguing the business side, all those things are helpful. Does anybody have questions? Want to have me play with more stuff? Yes?
Do you have any plans for opening a PR so that your links are on the Pa11y dashboard? So it can get all the nice prettiness of the Pa11y dashboard and minimal effort, but your link through to the documentation?
No, I actually hadn't even thought about that.
I want both. I'm greedy.
Yeah, good call.
True.
E?
Amazing greedy.
Yes.
Does Pa11y or another tool help with dynamic DOM changes? So a lot of stuff has been static so far, but you use a keyboard to click on a link, swap out part of the DOM. How do you test for that being accessible?
So that's when actions come into play. And so, like, let's say you click something, then you wait for that to load, and then you start a new test for, like, so you have an action where you click something, you wait for whatever you're expecting that DOM change to be, and then you run the test against that. Does that make sense?
Does that restart the test, or does it, so what I'm thinking of is there are, I'm drawing a blank right now, I also need more coffee, where you can have the DOM sort of announce that it's changing, without having to sort of start over at the top of the page.
So it wouldn't necessarily be the test restarting. Like have you written end-to-end tests before? Okay, so it's kind of that same concept, right? Where you've got all these different like scenarios. And so that's what your test is gonna be. So you're gonna create a test that you're gonna hit this URL, you're gonna do these actions, you're gonna wait for this to happen, and then that test is gonna execute. So those actions will happen before the actual accessibility test runs. And then, another test for a different scenario and another test. Does that answer your question? Sweet.
So that you're likely to have tests for functionality. Is there any way of saying, at each point where I'm testing the functionality, that's probably a good time to check that things look accessible at this point and sort of have it built into the rest of your testing? Is that even slightly feasible as non-front-end guy?
Well, no, it probably is. I'm trying to remember because it's been a while since I've done end-to-end tests versus unit tests. But I don't know if you could run it's all JavaScript based, so it depends on the other testing tool you're using. But you could absolutely integrate that. Because I've done this before where I just run my accessibility test on Travis CI and then it'll fail, but I haven't done it consecutively. But I'm sure it can be done.
Can you use Pa11y in continuous integration built on the Visual Studio 9 Azure DevOps?
I don't know enough about Visual Studio to answer that question. Okay, I've never run continuous integration there.
Sorry about that question.
Yes.
How do you set up the Pa11y file? Is it just a normal text file?
So Yeah, so you've got a couple different options. You can create a Pa11y file just like that, .Pa11y, and that'll run automatically. But if you need more programmatic access, like when we were talking about actions and doing things like that, it's just a JavaScript file. And I've got here, and I'm just requiring in Pa11y, and then this is essentially creating a test to be run that's going to handle my actions. I'm setting my logging. I was taking a screenshot, and then I'm taking my results and putting them to an HTML file. So it's just a basic JavaScript file. Yep. All right. Have a lovely day, you wonderful humans.